The Girl Next Door, revered as one of the most disturbing horror movies of all time. We're going to go through it, see how disturbing it is, go through the plot, and it is also based on a true story, so we're going to see how it pairs up to what happened in real life. As a little teaser here, the movie is based on a book called The Girl Next Door, and it's based on the real life murder of Sylvia Likens, which happened back in 1965 in Indiana. And this movie does try to do its best to tell the story as it is. But like the author said, some details are just way too disturbing to put in the book, which also kind of happens with the movie. But here, let's break it down. This movie looks like it's made for TV. The 2007 is when it released, and the quality of the video is not high quality, but it definitely fits what it's going for with it being a disturbing movie. It is that lower grain quality, and everything looks like it's supposed to because the movie itself takes place in the 50s. We start off following a man, and we see him crossing the road, and an old man gets hit by a vehicle. He gives him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, brings him back to life, and as he's sent off on his way, he talks about how he wishes he could have been that guy because he's endured a lot of pain and he has a hard time living with himself. So we're getting the story of what happened to Sylvia Likens in this movie. Her name is Meg, and we're getting it through the eyes of a friend. But that's the fictional part of it. But the author who wrote the book did this because he didn't want to have to do the material directly from the source of who it was happening to because of how disturbing it was. So then we cut and we finally meet Meg back in 1950s. As she's coming into this town, she meets this boy, which is the old man in the beginning, and they're catching some crawfish. It's a fun little kid's moment. They're having a good time. Meg's probably about 15, 16, and this boy looks like he's probably 12 or 13 years old. But they seem to hit it off and they're good friends, and he finds out that she's living next door. Her parents both got into a car accident with her and her sister in the vehicle, and both parents died. Meg got a couple of scars here and there, and her sister got so severely injured during the car accident that she wears those leg braces like you see for kids who have polio back in the day. So she is a little bit disabled. So this all seems kind of normal. They all play this fun game in the woods where they blindfold and they throw apples at each other. It's kind of like a tag. And then when they finally catch this girl, they ask her some very, very inappropriate questions, which kind of lets you know this isn't your normal movie. Does it look like it could be a Hallmark movie? Yes. Is the material Hallmark? No. No, not at all. It is very disturbing material to watch. When I watched this movie, as I got through it by the end, the only way I could describe it was just sad. It was just a sad story. So we follow him along, and this boy goes over to his neighbor's house where the neighbor is a mom. I think she has 4 boys, and she has the 2 girls living there because she's their aunt, and her name is Ruth. And her aunt is taking care of them now that they don't have parents anymore. But the aunt lives by a set of different rules because she's been wronged so much in her life. So she is kind of thick-skinned, she's tough, she's abrasive, and she's not what you expect from a motherly character in a movie. Later on, we see that Meg and the boy, I think his name is Billy, so I'm just gonna say Billy from now on. But Meg and Billy, they go to a food truck, and he orders a burger, and Meg asks him if she can get one too, because she hasn't eaten in 2 days. And this is like the first sign of what Ruth is doing to these girls. Is she tells Meg that she's too fat, and she refuses to let her eat. So we have a little bit of malnourishment going on. As the movie plays along, we get a little further into it, and we see that she is very verbally abusive, mentally abusive. She takes stuff out on the kids. And her boys pretty much run the house. They run roughshod. They can do as they want. The mom will put them into place, but she pretty much lets them get away with anything they want to do. So, as the movie's playing along, we get further and further into bad things happening. And they're doing a thing where the boys are upstairs tickling Meg, and she's laughing and giggling, but it gets a little bit too far because the one boy touches her boob, and she smacks him. And she runs away, and the mother comes upstairs to find out what happened. They pulled her sister, whose name is Susan, out of the closet. I don't know why she was hiding in the closet to begin with. And Ruth, the mother, asks Susan if she saw what happened and would she be mad at her sister. And said she would not be mad at her sister for hitting the boy. She's an accomplice, so she needs to be taught a lesson. And we get our first uncomfortable moment in the movie. The mother then takes the girl who's disabled and pushes her down on the bed face first, pulls her to the end. We see her pull her panties down, and we get to see her beat her ass with, it looks like a cleaning utensil of some sorts. Maybe a toilet brush. But she's going to give her 20 spankings, and Meg comes in the room seeing it, tries to stop her in a sense, but the boys hold her back so she can't, and she just gets to watch her sister get her ass beat to get punished for her smacking the boy who decided to grope her. So, with all this happening, there's another scene. We see Meg goes over to the police and lets them know what's going on. And the police do end up coming over, but we don't see this happen, and we're told that the police aren't going to do anything about it. And now Ruth has to really think about how she needs to get this situation taken care of. The next day, Billy comes over to the house, and they're all down in the basement. So we get to stay in the basement for pretty much the rest of this movie because Meg is down there, and she's blindfolded. She has a gag over her mouth, and she has both hands tied up with rope, and there's weights holding them on there to stretch her out. They do have her on some books, but they're going to play a little game of telling the truth. And she's not saying anything. Her mouth is gagged, so it's kind of impossible to. And they remove a book, and another book, and another book. So that's really straining on her arms. And here's where things get really kind of intense and disturbing for the rest of this film. They do cut her clothes off her there, so she is standing there naked. She gets punched, she gets kicked, she gets smacked, she gets whipped. They do have a scene where the one boy accidentally cuts her because he's pushing on her with a knife. And the mother, Ruth, says, well, we can't let that get infected. So then she puts her cigarettes out on the cut to cauterize it, as any good mother would do. And most of the time, Billy's seeing this, and Billy is disturbed by what's happening. And there's moments where it's like he wants to tell somebody, but he's too afraid because Ruth is threatened that if anybody finds out what's going on, she's going to kill him. So she has a real strong hold on these kids. And as another parenting 101, she does give them cigarettes and beer all the time, even though none of them are even close to the legal drinking age. So as the movie progresses and we get into more and more in-depth disturbing things, I'm just going to kind of go through a few of them here because it's just easier to get them out of the way. So we saw the moment where she got burned. Next scene that does happen is all of the kids are down there. They're kind of bullying her, pushing her around, and beat on her a little bit. Kind of like it's a group activity for the whole entire neighborhood of children. And then we get Billy going down there the one day, and Ruth's oldest son is raping the girl on the bed. At this point, she's barely even alive. She's been beaten, she's been tortured, she's been malnourished, she can't even get food down because she's so dehydrated. And then after that happens, the mother says, hey, she's dirty. You probably got the clap. But don't worry, they got medicine for that. And then her other son wants to then do the same thing, but she refuses to let him do it because that's like incest. Your brother was just in there, so you shouldn't be in there. That's disgusting. Why would you want to do that? So she has this weird, like, higher moral for men, and for women, she acts like the only thing women have to offer is their body, and that's all that they're good for. In another scene, Meg does a nice painting for Billy, and he tries to give it to Ruth, and Ruth gets very upset about it and is like, why would you give him this? He's only here for one thing. If you give him this stuff, he already knows that you're easy and he can get to you. She's always calling her a whore, a prostitute, a slut. She uses the word slut all the time. She goes through explaining why you shouldn't be a slut. Um, and at one point, her real little boy, who is probably, I'm going to go with 6 or 7 years old, wants to cut her. So then Ruth comes up with the bright idea that yes, we should. We should cut something into her skin. So she takes a needle and she lights it on fire over and over again to sterilize it. And she writes on her stomach, I fuck me. And she says, now no man will ever want to be with her. I've done her the privilege of not having to deal with men because that's better for her. So clearly, her having all these children and the men coming and going and leaving and not staying with her has done some sort of a number on her. And after that, she then says, but she'll still have urges, so we need to stop that. And I don't know if watching the needle burning to cut the words into her is the most disturbing part of the movie. Some people might think so. You see a lot of the wincing. It doesn't go into great detail of showing you a ton of stuff, which is for the better. The story itself of what it's telling you is way more than enough to have to picture in your own mind that you don't have to actually see it. But then the next scene that is probably considered to be more disturbing for some people is her idea for stopping Meg from having any urges and wanting to find a man is what they do in those other countries, where they just make it not an option. So her idea of making it not an option is she grabs a blowtorch, and we see the blowtorch light, and we see her go down towards Meg's crotch, and we hear screaming, but it doesn't show it. Thank God. Not something you want to see in your movie. But then it kind of fades to black, and we do get to where Billy comes downstairs. He devises a plan. At this point, he's been knocked out, and they have him kind of caught down there as well. And he ends up getting the ropes off himself, and he starts a fire in the basement with some stuff, which then sends Ruth down there, and he beats Ruth over the head with a crutch. And he uses this crutch and beats her and beats her and beats her and kills her. And then the sun comes down, and he has Billy on the ground, and he's holding a knife to his throat, and the cops come in. The cops come in, they arrest him, they send Susan, the younger sister, who was there to witness all of this happen, take her up to the police car, and Billy stays with Meg as she's speaking. It's finally going to be okay, it's going to be safe, they're going to be fine. Hollywood ending. Except for we don't get the Hollywood ending. In this movie, she's talking, and eventually she just dies before the police officer can come back down to get them. And then we go back to the guy as an adult, and he's been thinking about this whole story. Obviously, that's how he heard it, and he's crying there about what he has to deal with. He's had a very financially successful life, but he still has all this torture and trauma because Meg was his first summer love. And he pretty much watched everything that happened to her. And that's how the movie ends. Disturbing? Yes, it's a very disturbing movie. You're watching all this happen to like a 15, 16-year-old girl. There's little boys who are doing these beatings, the raping, all this stuff, the mutilation they do to her. And it's like, towards the end of the movie, it's like a whole crowd of kids, like 15 or 20 kids watching all this happen. And everybody seems to be perfectly okay with it. And nobody does anything about it. And the sad part is for the true story of this with Sylvia Likens, she did end up going to a neighbor or a friend's house. It wasn't her aunt. Her parents were in I don't think it was a circus. I think it was more like the carnival. And they're trying to make ends meet. And the mom ends up getting arrested. And she was stealing, but they throw her in jail. And the father can't take care of them, so he asks this friend from church, who I'm not going to say her name because you're a piece of shit. You don't deserve to get the recognition. Just my thoughts. When people do bad shit, it shouldn't always be about what they did, and they shouldn't get all the fame because they suck. Off the rant now. But they give her to this girl. They give this woman both kids, and he says, if you watch these kids for me, I'll give you $20 a week so that I can still go to work. And she says, fine. And everything's fine and dandy. Nothing bad really happens. And then one of the checks doesn't show up on time. So she then takes it out on the girls. She prevents them from feeding. And as time goes on, it gets worse and worse, which is where some of the bad stuff in the movie does come from. There is a lot of beating. The cigarette burning was something that happened. The cutting into her stomach was something that happened. They changed it for Hollywood for the words that were there, because I believe it said I'm a prostitute on her stomach is what they carved into her. And they did do the body mutilation and everything else. A lot of times the sister did get beatings in this, and the sister also had to help aid in the beating of her own sister, because if she didn't, they were going to take it out on her. And in real life, her sister was disabled. So this woman did all this stuff, and in the movie she only had boys, but in real life she did have a daughter, and the daughter did all this stuff as well. And they beat him. And the weird thing about the movie versus real life is, in the movie they had her trapped in this basement the entire time, but in real life they still sent Sylvia to school, and she still went to church, having all these bruises and beatings and being malnourished. And all of this happened, and whenever anybody asked a question of any sort, the main woman told them that she's out being a prostitute and I can't control her. Some of this is me trying to punish her for being a prostitute. And she always had like this reasoning behind it. And it did get so bad to the point when she was locked in the basement eventually that she would invite the neighborhood kids down to do whatever they wanted. You want to punch her, you want to cut her, you want to have sex with her, whatever you want to do. Just give me a nickel. You can do what you want. And this is what was happening to this girl. And unfortunately, this girl did put up with this for 3 months. And she did eventually just give up and die. And that when she died, they washed her up and they called the police. And they tried to play it off as if, I don't know what happened. But the stories didn't corroborate as time went on, and they were able to split them up and figure out what had happened. And they were able to finally convict. And at this time, most of the kids involved got like a 2 to 25 years in prison or a plea deal of some sorts, in a sense, because they were kids, but kids know the difference between right and wrong when it comes to shit like that. And the main woman who did this got 25 years in prison. But after 15 years, she did get released on good behavior. 5 years after that, she did die of lung cancer. In the movie, they show Ruth chain smoking like a fiend. And I guess this woman in real life, that was her. She was only 30-something years old when this was happening. But because she had smoked so much and been through so much in her life, I guess, in a sense, because she had like 7 children, but by many, many different guys, because nobody wanted to stay with her. She looked like she was like in her 50s because she had smoked so much and it did such a toll on her body, all the cigarette stuff, and then she died of lung cancer, which is a shitty way to go. But when you're a shitty person, you deserve shitty ways to go. I'm very surprised they didn't give her the death penalty. This was Indiana back in the 60s. I would think they still had the death penalty back then. But overall, my thoughts on the movie compared to the true story, it definitely works for what it's going for. It's disturbing, it's sad, it's depressing. It's not a movie that I would recommend to anybody to watch, unless that's your kind of thing. When I was going to describe it to somebody, I'd say I watched a disturbing movie, so you didn't have to. Because I wouldn't recommend anybody sit through it. It's not one that I will ever revisit. Seeing it once is enough for me, and the overall sadness of the story is not just because of it being disturbing on what it's all about, but it's the fact that it's based on a true story, and the things they do put in the movie all really happened. They didn't fake that. And then learning about what happened in real life was even worse than what happened in the movie. I didn't go into all the details of what happened in real life because if you want to, you can look it up. You can go on the internet, Wikipedia. You can also watch other YouTube channels of people who do the true crime side of it. And it's pretty daunting what happened to Sylvia. So, my overall rating on this movie is I will give it about a 3.5. 3.5 seems fair. Like I said, I wouldn't watch it again. It wasn't the highest quality to watch, but the acting in it, for what they were going for, they all did a very good job. And the way they showed the disturbing stuff on screen without showing you too much was a nice touch, because sometimes you don't have to show everything to make people feel a certain way. This movie definitely figured that out. Until the next one, guys, rest in peace.